present the president roadmap, when everything you know was wrong.
Sir, they want us to collect all the data variables. What is the proxy hour?
Okay, Rachel, listen to me. I need you to clear your cache. No, clear your cache, okay? How many times have you cleared up? 1, 2.
That's what I get for having, like, half my staff with Yale degrees and theater degrees. Okay, before we begin, I wanted to recognize something that a great accomplishment we had here in Texas. Some of you all may have remembered that the GED testing service had done a search for kind of exceptional GED graduates, and they were searching for 5 across the country. And we were honored to have one of those selected here in Texas. This individual is going to be recognized at the GED National Convention this year. And the individual's name is Alonda Flores from Regional Educational Service Center in the back there. A great story. You can see why this individual is getting recognized. Alonda originally initially enrolled in an ESL program, worked her way up through into a GED class and an integrated education and training program in phlebotomy that was offered through South Texas College. And she's currently enrolled in South Texas College and taking more advanced classes. So she's one of 5 students to be awarded this year. $1,000 scholarship, an iPad, hotel and travel to the GED conference in Dallas, professional photo shoot, and all kinds of things like that. So, great job out there in Regional Service Center. And okay, we're going to kind of start to turn the corner and wrap things up. I was still thinking about this video. I love that thing. It's the first time I saw it. So in this video, I want to first tell you, this was in your packet from yesterday, starting on page 37. And we're going to send some revisions. As Carrie mentioned, as we've gone through, there's some things we want to tweak on these PowerPoints, so we will be sending out revisions. This one is one of those. So follow along, and we'll kind of walk through this topic of credentials. We kind of started yesterday when we were talking about high school equivalency and how that could be also a credential and a measurable skill gain, and we'll continue that here. So what are credentials in WIOA? Well, there's essentially 2 types of credentials. The ones we spoke of yesterday, the diploma or its recognized equivalent here at Texas, as we mentioned several times, we're only doing equivalent. And then there is the recognized post-secondary credential, which would be things that we would see awarded typically or really almost exclusively in the integrated education and training program model. So who is in the denominator for the credential? So look at this one closely. All calculations include all participants who exited from a program and were either in a post-secondary education or training program or in a secondary education program at or above the 9th grade level that did not have a secondary school not all students, it's the ones that meet that criteria, with the exclusion for this measure of individuals that are served in correction, who are still incarcerated in the gangs. And is that exclusion true for the high school equivalency students in correction? Or just
Well, it's a solution for just that penalty as nothing is wrong.
okay.
Now, I think that. So this gets us kind of started into the discussion where things are a little bit different. So like, let's say they got their high school equivalency while they were in the program, aren't in the credential program, or aren't in the credential denominator. You continue to work with them after they get released, meaning now they are in the credential denominator, and then they exit. They could then get all the things that are required for that high school equivalency to count as a credential, meaning they would either have to enter post-secondary or become enrolled in become employed or continue to be employed, and then that can count as a credential. But essentially, this is saying they're not in that denominator for that credential obtainment measure, as long as they're in the program or they're incarcerated up until they exit.
Thank you. So let's do, this is probably some rewind from yesterday, but the high school equivalency, just to underscore, remember high school equivalency can be both a medical skill gain and a credential, but there are different rules that apply to whichever one you're using. The restrictions related to high school equivalency being earned by June 30th apply only to the credential measure. For the MSG, as we mentioned yesterday, there isn't a grade level, ninth grade or above requirement, nor that requirement to become employed for the MSG. Those apply only for when you're going to count the MSG as a credential, or the high school equivalency as a credential. So as a credential, it must be earned during or 1 year after exit of the program. It only includes participants at or above the ninth grade level to be counted in the denominator. So, an example here, if a participant earns a high school equivalency but is not at the ninth grade level, when they exit, they won't count in the credential. And we spoke about that yesterday, about really maybe wanting to post-test them to see if they can get into that ninth grade cohort. We also mentioned something we're going to try to clarify next week is that all skill areas that you're testing in, or is it just the lowest skill area? What is ninth grade counting as in the denominator? So we're going to talk to the Department of Ed and get some clarity. We've asked them several times. Also, participants must be employed or enrolled in an education or training program leading to a recognized post-secondary credential within 1 year following the exit. So essentially, students can participate in the program and then become employed or enrolled 1 year after. So that's the thing where monitoring that on your end to know if they're going to count in your credential measure, I think is going to be problematic for you, because you may not be able to get just-in-time information on people that become employed and things like that. But those are things we can collect very securely through our data matches and things like that. So we'll be counting at the state level. You may not be able to see that in real time on your side. There was a question already here from
I need some recommendation on what to do with Spanish agency.
Okay, that's the next slide.
Great.
All right. What's your recommendation?
What's your question? Yes. So we have Spanish agency students who take the test in English, but they get their credential, but they're not at a ninth grade level. And sometimes they don't make gains because their instruction is not English. So what measurable gain can we count on those two?
Okay, let me talk about the Spanish equivalency first. So your question is they get the Spanish equivalency, but what is the MSG?
Right. Well, in that case, the equivalency would be the MSG. we're going to address is using the Spanish high school equivalency as a credential. Because just, again, to remind you, to be in the denominator, meaning to get counted for a credential, you have to be at entry or at some point during your instruction, the 9th grade level. And what that means is your, if you get that high school equivalency and you're not at that 9th grade level, it's not going to, and you then exit, not having been shown at the 9th grade level, you're, it's not going to count as a credential because you're not in the denominator. You don't exist in that measure essentially. So it's kind of like a no loss, no gain situation. But in that situation, obviously for high school equivalency in another language, there's no, that we ask this question, the guidance we got from the Department of Ed is we basically decide what is considered 9th grade for Spanish GE, which Anthony's going to talk about in a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, so this was, I mean, first off, who all's doing Spanish high school equivalency? Okay, that's good. That's more than I thought, actually. Who is interested in doing them and doesn't know much about it? Okay, got a few there. We became concerned about this because of this whole issue of how do you count 9th grade for an ESL student when none of the ESL tests tagged to a 9th grade. The same discussion was happening in Washington State by my colleague John Curran, who's the state director. So we kept asking this question, and I'm telling you, we asked this question probably for a year and a half to the Department of Education. They went for about 14 of those months saying, why would you want to do that? And finally we said, because we have thousands of students that are getting this. And the way it works in the rules, the Department of Ed has to count the equivalency for whatever the state approved tests for high school equivalency are in the state. So in Texas, the tests are approved to be in English and in Spanish. Not all states approve second language high school equivalency, so we're fortunate in Texas. Braille also, French also. We asked them, how do we define the 9th grade? And after about 14 months or so, they came back and said, the state defines 9th grade however they want to define 9th grade. So it's up to us. They're not going to tell us how to do it. So right now, we've been having discussions with some of you, Mary Jo Ochoa from the Far West, who's also on our advisory committee. Thank you, Mary Jo. One raise your hand there, Mary Jo, from one of our new advisory committee members. In El Paso, they've been doing high school equivalency since I've been in adult education for 20 years or so, probably much longer than that. So I knew they had a very advanced model. Not saying that they don't do, but I knew they did. So I kind of tapped them, and they talked to their instructors and stuff. So some of the ideas that are out there, and we're going to put guidance out on this, and I'm open to other ideas, because when they give me creativity to define 9th grade, I'm going to take it. So what we're doing, right now it looks like the things that we're thinking of would be that you would, so defining 9th grade, we would say you can define it by things such as a certain score on a practice test for, say, the GED. So you know as a program, if a student gets to this level, they have a pretty good chance of getting high school equivalency within that year. So we would accept something like a minimum score. We haven't defined that score yet. I'd love to have your feedback. Remember, this is in Spanish, so we have to use Spanish instruments if we're looking for instruments. The TEG Español, which is the TEG test in Spanish, the limitations there is, I was kind of crushed when I heard this, but the TEG Español only goes up to, I think it's a version M. Essentially, it only goes up to 9th grade. So they would have to have, like, a very good score on the TEG Español, basically testing out of it. Because then that would mean they're the end of 8th grade level, they'd be in the 9th grade. Documentation of up to 8 years of education in So they bring in transcripts that was a school in Mexico or Costa Rica or somewhere, and it shows they've had that many years or more education. So that could be good documentation. If they came in with 2 years, you wouldn't want them in your denominator class. And this is not about telling people they can't be in Spanish high school equivalency classes at their lower level. It's just about which ones you want to elect to put in the denominator. So some people may come in at second grade level in Spanish, and it's going to take them 4 years to get a high school equivalency. That's understood. But you don't want them for 4 years in your denominator, or in your counting against you. And then the other option we've talked about is locally designed tests, because probably the most reasonable way, if you're coming from an instructional aspect, is my teachers know when they're ready, right? So some sort of documentation for something like that, which would be maybe a locally designed test or something like that in Spanish. So this is one great value, I think, and we'll put out guidance. If you have any other ideas, I mean, we looked at things such as the Woodcock-Munoz test, which is another type of test available in Spanish that people use oftentimes in kind of psychological assessment, academic assessment sessions for determination of learning disabilities and things like that. And there's some other Spanish language tests, but a lot of them are normed on children. So I didn't want to use a children's test for adults, because that's not going to be very so that's where we are on that. Any questions about that dynamic? Anybody have some? Okay. Yeah, one thing about it. Post-secondary credentials. So we've done the secondary. Let's look at post-secondary real quick here. We went through this a little bit yesterday, but there's a broad range of credentials, and many of them are post-secondary. And when you're doing things like your IBT or integrated health civics, that's where you're going to be walking into the world of post-secondary credentials and certification. All participants, so who gets credit for post-secondary? All participants co-enrolled in post-secondary education and training during participation. That first bullet was one that we actually really lobbied with the Department of Ed on while they were developing the guidance around this, because initially they were saying the only people that would be included would be students that were in IEPs. And we said, well, there are other instances when a student may access adult education, but not be in an IEP. For example, they're enrolled in a college program, they get in, they realize they need more math, it's not an IEP, and they come to you and you provide some sort of intensive math programs. I think we'll see more of those kind of models. Not necessarily all the bells and whistles of an IEP, but they need to come in for a touch-up remediation so they can get through the shop math that's needed to finish construction trades program or something. So we didn't want the definition to be limited to just IEP. And they listened to Region and they made that little edit to one of their tables that see. So this includes IEP, but also other individuals. And it can be earned within 1 year of exit. So it's not counted until the individual exit. So again, this is one of these post-exit concepts. Oh, that's the last slide, sorry. We had some other slides, but we're going to move on because we're getting tight on time here. So let's take some questions on credentials that you might have, post-secondary or secondary credentials. And right now, I have questions to Adam Leonard. I'm working on them right now because credentials are very well defined when you're in a college setting or something like that. They make a lot of sense. If you look at our AEL letter 0216, the IEP letter, we list examples of what would credentials be, licenses like and certifications like CNA, industry recognized certifications, things like that. The places where I get a little less secure are when they're customized credentials, like with an employer and things like that. So I'm trying to get some more guidance based on what he knows, and he's coming up short on some of this. But I want to try to make sure we offer you as many opportunities to be able to collect those types of credits and get credit for post-secondary credentials, other than just defaulting to things like college credentials, which are typically where our line goes first. The other big one that is not defined is entrepreneurial programs, which I know a lot of you do, but you're not really going to get necessarily awarded a credential unless the entrepreneurial program you're in is offered through a college or something like that. So we're trying to find a way to say, like, is there a way we could, what would be a way for starting your business, what would be the credential related to that? We may come up with nothing if we can be creative enough to come up with something. To me, I would love to count something like a business plan or something like that, that is really the signal that you have completed, but whether, how that can be counted and stuff like that, I don't know. I don't want you to not do those kind of things because you can't get a credential for it, though. I don't like to be driven in that direction because those things make sense, and y'all are doing great work in those areas. So any questions on credential or post-secondary? Okay, Rita Woodfield from Literacy Council of Tyler.
I know that the entrepreneurial model is intended for ESL, but in our data collection process, we ask everyone if they're interested. Can it be used with HSE? Cool.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I don't know where, I think what's happened is the entrepreneurial idea caught on because of the requirements for IET and integrated health civics. And somehow it has defaulted in our mind that it is an ESL training. It's not. You can do entrepreneurial training with anybody. That just seems, I think that was where we started, and somehow that tagged in our mind. I've gotten that question before. People say, well, can we do entrepreneurialism with our English speakers? And I'm like, well, sure. Absolutely. So I think it was just the first examples we saw and that we highlighted were in integrated health civic programs. So that's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up. Other questions? Y'all are past school.
So,
all I want to do is watch that video again.
So, real quick, I first have to do something we failed to do 4 days in a row. But I want to take a minute to acknowledge our amazing staff, all of whom are just at Everworks and in particular, those that have just been awesome in kind of being runners and things like that during the conference this week, which has been a tremendous help to us.
Well, and to that, I want to give it to Lori. The first few days, she was kind of head bottle washer on getting all the finance put together. Mahalia worked with the monitoring piece very well. And then, of course, Carrie has been doing the lion's share of the accountability. And the hours that go into these things, I can imagine. I want to thank you guys for all that. And then T-Call for broadcasting, running the mic, getting this all done.
An Oscar-worthy shout-out to my amazing director/cinematographer, Ann Cavino, who was patient with me and wanting to put a bunch ago, and then the time got shorter and shorter. Like 3 weeks ago, I was like, we're still gonna do this, we're gonna do this, and then we're still filming stuff like Monday, and I was sitting there editing at midnight on Tuesday or whatever.
I think I'm the only adult education director where their staff, the staff come in with CDs and they say, oh, watch this, I made this, movie, and it's like really good. And I'm like, you made this, like, it's amazing, yeah, I mean, we've got multiple examples, so.
And then obviously the actors, Anson and Fabiana, being incredibly cooperative and taking my notes via text.
Yeah, because I just get, Stan comes in with a cell phone and says, okay, Carrie just told me, look scared. And I don't know anything about the context. I don't know anything.
Wait, I told you to act like they had just announced that the asteroid was coming, and it was, 3 minutes away. And for some reason, it was like a serial killer was coming, and it just became scarier and scarier. So with that, I do want to do one final raffle, because this person's going to get a T-shirt and an Amazon gift card. And I want to make sure that we stuck it out to the bitter end. We get a final rating recognition. Hopefully, we won't have to go through like 30 seconds before we get an answer. So, Andy, we're going to have to do this like an auctioneer. Read that. Be ready.
Okay, the first one is 201258. 201258.